Hey guys, this is Ori from What Culture, and I'm here to talk to you today about the dark and comedic empire of unluckiness, or DCEU if you prefer. As has been widely documented over the years, although it is improving, the DCEU has suffered from numerous issues in the past. Most prominently, it's had problems with writing and studio interference, but one thing which has rarely been an issue is the acting. For the most part, the 8 films in the DCEU so far are well acted and well cast superhero films, with Ben Affleck, Margot Robbie, Viola Davis, Gal Gadot, Chris Pine, Jason Momoa, Ezra Miller, and Ewan McGregor being the highlights. Still, despite the overall consistency in this department, there have been a few much weaker acting performances too. Unsurprisingly, most of these are villainous roles. The DCEU does have quite a big villain problem, a far bigger one than the major cash flow union, or MCU if you prefer, ever did. And as such, the performers have sometimes struggled to make these characters work. So, in spite of the DCEU being a mostly well-performed franchise, these following 10 performances weren't up to scratch and are the worst in the series so far. In fact, a handful of them among the worst performances in any recent superhero movie. So whilst you're in the comments making up your own acronym of the letters DCE and U, here are the 10 worst performances in the DCEU so far. Number 10, Elena Anaya, Dr. Poison. Wonder Woman is the DCEU's greatest film to date, cue nerd outrage in the comments, but like every single other film in the DCEU so far, aside from Birds of Prey and, to a lesser extent, Man of Steel, the film struggled with its villain quite a bit. This German scientist should have been a lot better given her cool name and interesting appearance, but she was ultimately a bland supporting character inhabited by a lifeless performance from Spanish actress Elena Anaya. Anaya is a more than capable actress, as shown by films such as Pedro Almodovar's The Skin I Live In, but she failed to give a particularly compelling performance here. As such, she joins the very, very long list of talented actors wasted on terrible superhero movie villains. Yeah, and buckle up, because there are quite a few more examples of this on this list too. Number 9, Danny Huston, Erich Ludendorff. This is pretty much in the same category as the previous entry. Erich Ludendorff, Wonder Woman's other German villain, was another weak secondary antagonist inhabited by another lifeless performance that was little more than Danny Huston speaking in a German accent and sounding slightly annoyed. Once again, Danny Huston is a more than capable actor with a long and prosperous career to his name, ignoring X-Men Origins Wolverine. But he was let down by this poorly written part, which didn't really give him anything much to do. Overall, he and the aforementioned Elena Anaya are the weakest performers in the otherwise strongly acted Wonder Woman. The main villain, Ares, played by David Thewlis, was also disappointing, although David Thewlis' performance was perfectly okay, so he's not on here. Number 8, Russell Crowe, Jor-El. Russell Crowe can be an incredible performer, regardless of his many shortcomings as a person, so this will definitely go down as one of his weaker roles. As Superman's father, Jor-El, Russell Crowe just didn't seem remotely interested and portrayed the character with one tone of voice and one facial expression throughout his relatively small part, thankfully. He also failed to hide his native accent very well. And while it's not comparable to his disastrous stab at a Nottingham accent in 2010's Robin Hood, it's certainly safe to say an Australian New Zealand accent still feels out of place on the planet Krypton. Granted, the DCEU has offered far better versions of Lois Lane and Jonathan and Martha Kent than the Christopher Reeve films ever did, but the Marlon Brando version of Jor-El in the 1978 film is far superior to Crowe's version, and that's not even up for debate. Number 7, Jared Leto, Joker. I think we all knew this was going to make the list, and I also ask you this simple question. How much of Suicide Squad could have been told without Jared Leto's Joker in it? His role was basically an extended cameo, and it's clear that Jared Leto wasn't happy about just how little he's actually in Suicide Squad. But what little remains in the film isn't great at all. This performance just feels like a pale imitation of both Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger's Jokers, and there's no nuance or intimidation beneath all the wacky facial expressions and evil laughter at all. He just doesn't ever feel like a genuine threat and seems more like a crazy stoner than an evil supervillain. As well as this, since we've just seen Joaquin Phoenix giving a near perfect performance as the Joker that won him a well-deserved Oscar too, this take on the character feels even less satisfactory in hindsight. By the sounds of things, Leto went way too far on set with his method acting. There are stories of Leto apparently sending a live rat, bullets, a soiled magazine, a dead hog, sex toys, used condoms, and probably more to the cast and crew. So you can imagine they thought he was a bit of a dick. And it's a shame that all that terrible behaviour was for such a meaningless, undercooked role. Number 6. Patrick Wilson, or Marius, Ocean Master. This was an odd one. This was actually a well-written villain who could definitely have been really good with a stronger performance. But the often excellent Patrick Wilson just didn't seem very interested and played it all far too quiet and straight. Given the OTT nature of the character, a hammier and more flamboyant performance was needed to make him truly work. But Wilson just didn't do that at all. Since the script developed the character just fine, Ocean Master feels like an enormous missed opportunity in retrospect. He's not quite the worst performer from Aquaman, coming soon on this list, but in a largely good ensemble cast, he certainly sticks out as one of the weakest links. Number 5. Mark Strong, Dr. Thaddeus Savannah. Now I enjoyed Shazam, and I'm a big fan of Mark Strong, but this one was extremely odd. Not only is Mark Strong a great actor, but he's normally an absolute goldmine when it comes to playing villains. So this was an uncharacteristically off performance from him. Admittedly, Dr. Thaddeus Savannah wasn't a well-written or interesting character, but that doesn't always doom a villain. Sometimes great performances will carry them far beyond above any writing issues. Just look at Gary Oldman in Leon, who elevated a straightforward villain to greatness with his amazing work. Sadly, this wasn't the case here. Strong's performance is largely a slightly cross-facial expression and vaguely threatening sounding monotone, and sadly this makes the character sleep-inducing to watch. Perhaps he just struggled to find a way to make the character very interesting, which is fair enough. A bad Mark Strong performance is very rare, but this is definitely one of them. It's probably one of his worst performances to date. Number 4. Ciarán Hinds, Steppenwolf. I have a confession to make. Whilst knowing it wasn't the best of DCEU films, I actually enjoyed Justice League. I know. Ooh, Ori, what were you thinking? We can have that discussion on Twitter. Admittedly, Steppenwolf was not a good villain in the film at all, and since he was a personality-free blob of CGI, any actor would have struggled to liven him up. Sure enough, Ciarán Hinds, an excellent character actor from Northern Ireland, gave a very weak performance as him and failed to imbue him with any sort of life. As a performance, it was pretty much a very slightly evil voice and pretty much nothing else whatsoever. Still, luckily for Hinds, many probably didn't even realize it was him. Maybe whatever version we see of this character in the upcoming Snyder Cut of Justice League will be better. It's hard to imagine it being a lot worse than the undercooked character we received in the original Justice League, so one can hope. Number 3. Kekoa Kekumano, young Aquaman. I feel bad for saying this, but a spade is a spade and a trident is a trident. Mercifully, this was just a one-scene role, but even so, thanks to how bad Kekoa Kekumano's acting was, this no doubt took pretty much everyone right out of the movie. Criticizing a young actor is never fun, but Kekumano clearly wasn't the right choice for this. I mean, damn, he was outacted by the child actor who played an even younger Aquaman in a couple of scenes earlier on, and he barely had any lines or screen time. Kekumano's line delivery was so awful, and his attempts to express frustration and sadness were so unintentionally hilarious that what should have been a powerful scene in which Aquaman found out his mother is presumed dead is instead a complete wreck of a movie moment that is impossible to take seriously. The only reason he isn't higher is because it was such a small part. If it had been bigger, it probably would have been number 1. Number 2, Jesse Eisenberg, Lex Luthor. When watching Batman vs Superman, this hurt me to see. Although he gives the same performance in most movies, Jesse Eisenberg is capable of being very good. This performance is easily the worst of his career. A high-pitched, screeching and cringeworthy performance, Eisenberg comes across more as some badly behaved rich kid who's had too much caffeine, not as an evil billionaire genius at all. He's never, ever intimidating and seemed to think he was playing a completely different character in a completely different movie. Not only was this giggling performance unconvincing, it was also annoying as hell too, and was one of the worst villainous performances in any recent blockbuster. Sure, Gene Hackman's performance as Lex Luthor in the 1978 Superman film is pretty weak, but Eisenberg makes that performance look Oscar-worthy. More than anything else, this was fatal miscasting. It's hard to imagine Jesse Eisenberg would ever have worked as Lex Luthor, and he didn't improve in his post-credits cameo in Justice League either. Now, I'm not saying he can't play a villain, but he needs to stick to more social network lane style villains than ones that are supposed to intimidate the Man of Steel. And number 1, Cara Delevingne, Enchantress. It couldn't have been anything else at number 1. This is not only the worst performance in this franchise, but it's one of the worst performances ever to feature in a superhero movie. This howlingly awful, over-the-top and unintimidating performance feels like something out of a Friedberg and Seltzer spoof. And it's genuinely excruciating to watch. With her unintentionally hilarious facial expressions and awful line delivery done in Delevingne's native English accent, which felt wildly out of place here, Delevingne simply couldn't have been less scary if she tried. In fairness to her, it was a hard character to make work, but even so, Enchantress didn't need to be this awful. She could have just been another boring superhero movie villain, rather than one of the all-time worst. So this, by a country mile, no, by a distance of Earth to Krypton, was the worst DCEU performance so far. To be honest, given the continued winning streak this franchise is on, it's hard to imagine anything this bad coming along anytime soon. Onwards and upwards and never back to this. And there you go, our 10 worst performances in the DCEU so far. Did we miss any? Or do you feel we've been too harsh on some of the ones we've listed? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to What Culture for more great content like this. My name's Ori Styler. You can catch me on Twitter at Ori Styler, all one word, and I will see you next time. Take it easy.